Hey dev team, welcome back to Flutter with Drag. In the last episode we managed to get our layout completely sorted and our app is visually working, but functionally it does very little at the moment and we need to correct that. So let's get on with that. Now before we start, I have added two packages to our pubspec.yaml file because we're going to need them in the next few episodes. First one is provider and the second one is shared preferences, and those are the versions that we've got in. If you want to copy that into your pubspec.yaml, you'll need to restart your app to make sure that's in place. We'll be making use of those as we go through. I've just put it in at the beginning to save stopping and starting as we go through. Okay. So here's our app, and at the moment we are creating our event items and putting them in, which means our app is never going to change. We need to do something about this because we want the user to be able to create their own events and presumably delete them, and we need to do this in a slightly different way. At the moment we're taking and creating event items, but the event details of the event, i.e. the text and the time, are going to be different, and we're also going to need to add more information as we go along. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn the event information into a model, and we're going to pass the model into the event item somehow. We'll work out how we do that in a moment. So in our lib directory, I'm going to create a new folder called models, and I'm going to create a new file called timed_event.dart, and we're going to create a model called timed event. Timed event, and this is going to contain all the information that an event we need to know about an event. So at the moment we have 2 bits of information. I'm just going to copy that for a second and we'll paste it in here in a comment just so we can see what we've got. So the first information we've got is the text. Well, text is not really a good name for it. It's actually the title of the event, or it could be the event name. It could be a number of different things. I'm going to go with title. So we're going to create a final string title. Oops. And that's going to hold that information. And we've also got time, which is currently also a string. So we're going to have a final string time. So those are the 2 bits of information that we need and that we're going to be storing in an event currently. So we need to be able to create one of those, and to do that we have to create a constructor called the same name, timed event, and in it we're going to pass in bits of information. The first one also going to be required is this title, and the second one required this time. Okay, because both those bits of information are always going to be needed. Put our semicolons where needed, get rid of our comment, and that is the basics of our timed event. It's quite like a widget where we're passing arguments into the widget and properties into the widget, but it's not a widget because we're not extending here stateless widget or stateful widget. Okay, it is just an object, a Dart object, which has these properties. So let's save that. Okay. So now instead of having a list of timed events, I want to create a list of instead of a list of event items, we want a list of timed events. we got an error. We'll deal with that in a second. I'm just changing all those to timed events, and of course we've changed text to title, so we'll need to fix that. And in VS Code you can do that by holding down the middle mouse button and dragging over an area, and it'll give you 3 cursors or more, so we can change everything. Now it's complaining because we've said here we want a list of widgets, and I've just said timed events isn't a widget. So we could change this to dynamic, and dynamic basically means anything, any acceptable type, but that's not a great idea. We can be more specific about it, and what we're going to say is we want a list of timed events. So if we try to put something in here that wasn't a timed event, like for example a container, we're going to be told we can't do that because if I can get down to it, the element type container can't be assigned to a list type of time events because a container is not a timed event. Fab. Okay, so we've got that. What do we do with that? Well, let's come down our code a little bit further, and we've now got our event list taking in some timed events, and it's complaining the list argument typed timed events can't be assigned to the parameter type list widget. Let's go to our event list, and we can see here that timed events is expecting a list of widgets. Well, it's no longer a widget, we've discussed that, it's a timed event. So we need to change that, and that will fix the error up here, but create us more errors down here. Okay, so what's this error now? Well, if index is 0, it's going to return all this stuff, which is our blue button at the top of the app, the blue plus. Otherwise, it's going to return a time event. And it says here that the return timed event isn't a widget because an item builder, which we have here, expects a widget to be returned. And this isn't a widget. The widget was the event item. So we can put that in the event item and pass into the event item the timed event. Still the same index, still we want all 4 of them to be passed in. But now we've got the problem that time and text is required. So let's come down to here to where our event item is, and instead of passing in a time and a text now, we're going to be passing in a timed event, and we will call that simply event, and that's going to be required. So text is no longer required, but event is, and time no longer exists. Excellent. So we're getting there. But now text, we've just deleted text from this widget. So where do we get the text from? Well, we get the text from the event that we've passed in, and we can see that we have access to the properties on there, and we want the text to be the title, and down here the time is going to be the event time, and that should solve our problems, except it's not here. Event item is required, right? Okay, yeah, because of course we're passing in an event, so we need to tell it that the event is the timed events. Let's save that, and we'll do a hard reset because a lot has changed there. And back we go, everything is working as it was before. But now, instead of passing in a list of widgets, we're passing in a list of timed events. And this means we can add something else to this. We could, for example, and I'm going to delete this in a second, it's only an example, string details. we can add that to our required fields. Maybe it's not required. I'm going to add it as required. Let's get that in the right place. And that means straight away over here in our list items, except I'd have to put required here as well, but I'm not going to do it. Sorry, I have to put the detail here to make that work. I'm about to delete this. What I want to show you is down here in the list items, instead of the event title, we could put the event details. And it allows us to pass more information and store more information than is currently there. I'm taking that out, it's not needed, it's not part of our process. Okay, the next step I want to do is remove this event item and this event list from this file and put them in their own files. So from the lib folder, I'm going to make a new folder called widgets. And in that folder, I'm going to create a new file. And the first one is going to be event item.dart. And just like we've done before, we're going to take our event item, cut it, paste it, import the missing imports, and here we also need the timed event, so we're going to import the timed event as well. Excellent. And I'm also going to create a file called event list.dart, and we'll do the same thing. We'll take from the main, we will take our event list and we will cut that, paste it into here, bring in our missing imports, our material and our app color, and this one also wants the event item, so we can bring that in as well, and it wants timed events, so we will bring that in also. Save that. In our main, we now need to import the event list. Save that, and once again I'm going to do a hard restart just to make sure everything is still working as planned. Okay, so with that out of the way, we can now start creating the code that's going to actually do stuff with all of this. And to do that, we're going to create another class that isn't a widget, but is a service. A service is something that manages and looks after a whole host of things, if you like. They are just classes that do a specialized task within the app. So I'm going to create a new folder called services and create a file in there called timer service.dart. And in our timer service, we're going to call that timer service, and we're good to go. It's a class, I forgot to put that in. Right, okay. So this timer service is going to look after everything to do with the events and the timer. And so what we can do to start with is move our timed events from here. I'm going to cut it out of our main page and put it into our timer service. As with everything else, we're going to need to import the model so that it knows what it's about. And that's good. Now, once we save that, things are going to go a little bit pear-shaped because these timed events no longer exist here. We need to be able to access them. And we could do that in a number of ways. We could access the timer service and import it and do all sorts of stuff. But this is where we're going to turn to the provider package we installed at the beginning and use that so we can access the timer service throughout, because one of the things that's quite important here is we only want one timer service in the whole of our app. We don't want this to be generated multiple times in different files. It's going to keep the state of our timers, and it can only exist once. So under our scaffold, we're going to wrap that with a new widget, and the widget is going to be the provider widget. And the provider widget takes a create, and what it creates is the thing it is going to provide everywhere else. In our case, it's the timer service. Now, we have used provider sort of before, something very similar to it. If you remember, in our list, let me open up our list, our event list, we have a button that opens the drawer, and the code for that is scaffold of context open drawer. And what this does, specifically this bit, is it looks up the widget tree. So it basically goes up, says, are you a scaffold? Nope. Are you a scaffold? Nope. Are you a scaffold? Nope. And it keeps going up the widget tree, up our code, until it finds something that says, yes, I'm a scaffold. And then it tells it to open the drawer. And provider does something very similar. So that's a very simplistic description of it, but it sort of gives you the idea. So instead of passing this list into our event list now, we can come to our event list and say, well, actually, we're not going to put anything into it. It's going to find the timed events for itself. Okay, now we've got some errors. We will deal with those errors in a second. We'll need to put the key back. I'll come back to that in a moment. So within our build, we can find our timer service by putting in context read. What do we want it to read? Well, we want it to read the timer service. Okay, now we need to import these to make our life easier and to have autocomplete. And read is imported from the provider package. And when we import it from the provider package, it gives us this error here. Don't import implementation files from another package. I'm not sure why it does this, but to fix it, we just need to remove the source src from there, and then it imports to the right place. And now we're reading this timer service, we can access our timed events. And we can store that in a local list. So we can create our list of timed events, and we will call this timed events, and that's going to equal the list that is created in our service. So when we build it, it appears here. Okay, we need to fix this problem here. I deleted the constructor. Just by auto-completing that, it'll put it back in, and we've got our constructor back. So that shouldn't make a change, although when I save both of these files, it's all going to go red and wrong, probably, but we've got lots of errors. Let's just hit a reset, and we should find that our app is still working as we planned. We can take out a couple of things there. We can now put const back in here. It's not going to make a huge change yet, but it'll keep our linter happy. Okay, so that's great. We now have this list coming from timer service, but that's not really achieved us anything. It was doing exactly that a moment ago. But what we can do here is we can now write code that saves this list to something, a database or a file or whatever, and reads it when the app starts again. So let's give that a go. Let's first of all save, because at the moment we've got nothing to read because there's nothing saved. So we're going to create within our timer service a function called save. And this is where it's going to get a little bit complicated. And I'm going to get rid of the emulator just to give ourselves a lot of room so we can see what's going on. Okay, now how can we save it? Well, there's plenty of options. We could save it to somewhere online, we could save it to a database locally or anywhere else. I'm just going to save it as a string, and I'm going to save it into something called a shared preference, which is a little bit of information that is stored that the app can access. We're never going to have thousands of these timed events. It's never going to be huge. We're not going to have to do masses amount of sorting and things. So that'll do for our purposes. It keeps it nice and simple. But in order to save a bit of string, we need to convert all of that into a string, because at the moment that's not a string. And so what we need to do is convert it into, a simpler way of doing it is converting it into a JSON. Now, we need to just understand a little bit about maps and things. So I'm going to pull up a file I created earlier. And I just want to go through a few things. So within Dart, a string is defined, the name, the type, and then in speech marks we have a string. A number can be defined with int, the name of it, and it's the number. If I try to put those within speech marks, that would fail because that is no longer a number, that is a string. Okay. Now a map is basically a collection of dynamics. So let's look at this. Here I've created a map, and I'm saying it's a map of string dynamic, which I'm calling info, and I'm saving it, or I'm putting it within these curly braces. So this string here is saying what is the type of the key, and then the dynamic is, as we said before, anything. So the name is the key string, arms is a key, which is also a string, and I'm putting in my name, which is Drake, and number of arms, which is a number 2. Now if I put here, if I change that dynamic to string, then this wouldn't work because that's not a string, that is an integer. So that is why we've got that set as dynamic. So the keys, all the keys, doesn't matter what the information is, are going to be strings, and then this collection is going to contain numbers. Further example is we could have a map of integers to strings, and we could be linking days to, or the day number to the string. So in this map, the key 1, which is an integer, links to the string Monday, and then we could have 2, which links to Tuesday, so on and so forth. Now a list also takes a type, and so a list of strings could be a list of strings. Now a list is done within the square brackets, and so I've got a list of the days of the week. If I put in a number here, that's going to fail because 3 is not a string. However, that would work because that is a string. And finally, we can put the two together. and we can have a list. Okay, that's the list of maps of type string and dynamic. And so we've got our list, and within it we have our maps, and in this case we've got two maps. The first map, which is a key of string and then a value of dynamic, is me, my name Drag, arms 2. But my friend Bob, who's an octopus, is called Bob and he has 8 arms. Okay, that is just a quick explanation of what a map, difference between a map and a list is, and the reason that we want that information is going to become apparent very quickly. So we need to convert our timed event here into something, into the map, and to do that we're going to have to code it. So within our timed event we're going to create a function which will take a timed event and convert it to a map. So this is going to be a static function called map, and it's going to, sorry, it's not called map, but it's going to return a map of type string dynamic. Okay, now at the moment we could do string string because both of our things are string, title and time is string, but that's going to change in the future. We're going to call the function to map, and the function is going to take a timed event, which we're going to call event, and is going to return map. And the map, if you remember, we need a key for everything, so the key is going to be title, and the value is going to be the event.title. So this is the event we've passed in, and we're going to return the title like that. And the time, we're going to return the event.time. Okay, let's put that on multiple lines, make it a little bit easier to see. So that means now that the time event knows how to convert itself into a map. Great, so let's come back to the timer service, and within the timer service we can create that. We can take a timed event, so let's say timed event equals, let's just copy one of these, copy, and we can change that into a map by calling timed event to map and passing in the event we've just created, and that is going to return a map of string dynamic. And if we print that, we should see that being printed out to our console down below here. But we need to, in order to do that, we need to call this from somewhere. And so we're going to cheat for a moment, and in our event list, where we have the blue button at the top, let's try and find it, this blue button here, the circle outline button, I'm going to change that and wrap it with an icon button, just like we did below, which takes an icon and an onPressed. And on the onPressed we want to call our timer service, and we want to call the save button just to test this out. So how do we call it? Well, we access it in exactly the same way that we accessed it here. We say context read the timer service dot save, and that now when it's pressed we'll call this function. Now, is there other ways we can do this that doesn't call this twice? Yes, but we'll keep it this way, simple at the moment. We could have set up our timer service differently. In fact, it might be neater if we do that. So at the top here, we're going to create a new thing called timer service. Timer service equals our timer service. And then instead of calling context read there, we can just say timer service, time event, and the same here. Timer service save. It's a bit less code. Okay, let's save everything. And now when we bring our emulator back and we push our blue button, you can see at the bottom here we've got out a map. Title, my event 2, time, time. Okay. So that's good, but we can't save a map. We need to convert that into a string, and we also need to convert all of them, not just one at a time. So how do we go about doing that? We know how to convert a single event now by passing in timed event to map. So I'm just going to take out this print statement. That works. Okay, and now we need to do it for each of those. And we can do that by taking our list of timed events, map, and then doing something here. Now, this map is not the same as the map we've just been talking about. This map basically returns an iterable of something, so this list, and an iterable is something that you can go over step by step. So we're going to take our map, we're going to take our list, and we're going to step over each one in turn, and event is going to be, need a couple of things here, passed in, which we can then convert back. So this is going to map over our timed events, and for each event it's going to pass that into our toMap of our timed event and return the mapped version. Now we need a list, so at the end of all that we have an iterable, but we can call the toList function there, which changes all of that back to a list. What happens if we print that now? Let's save that and hit our button, and there we have an array, which is our list of our events. Excellent. Now all we need to do is convert all of that into JSON, and thankfully that is also something that's taken care of with JSON encode. So we're taking our entire map and returning it. Now let's print that whole of that. And again, when we hit our button, we get a, don't worry about that error, but what we do get is our JSON document, which is a string that we can do something with. Okay, so instead of printing it, we're going to set that string data equals JSON encode. And what are we going to do with it? Well, we're going to save it using shared preferences. Let's get rid of this event that we've popped in there. We don't need that. So shared preferences we haven't used yet, but shared preferences get instance, and when we look at this we can see that in the future we get a shared preference back. That means when this isn't going to happen instantly, it's going to happen some point in the future. And there's a number of different ways we can handle that. We can await it here, but if we're going to await things we need to put async here. And what that does is this turns this function into a future, and it's going to run the code and it's going to wait here until this has finished running. That's one way of doing it. I'm going to do it a different way. I'm going to put at the end of this then. Okay, and what we're going to do is put a function in here. So wait for shared preferences, and once you've got it, then take that preference and let's do something with that preference there. And what we want to do is set a string, and the string we want to set is called events. You can give it any name here you want. We just need to keep it consistent throughout our code, and the value is going to be the data. Let's save that. And now when we click our button, nothing happens, but that data should be saved. How can we test that? Well, we can comment out all of this up here now and save our app. And when we restart our app, we've got no events. But what we can do is the opposite of this and load the events in. So let's do that. Let's create a void load and write the code to load those events in. So we're going to do the same thing as we've done before. We need the shared preferences. So shared preferences, get instance, then we'll get our prefs and we will run our function. Okay, so when it's loading, this function will first be called, and it's not happening yet, but it will be once we do a few more changes. And it's going to run this and anything else that's in there. So what we need to do is first check whether this prefs event exists, because if it doesn't, it'll crash. And when the app first starts, the very first time our users use it, there aren't going to be any events. So we can say if prefs contains key events, it's the same as that, then do what we're about to do, otherwise do nothing. What we need to do is now reverse what we've done up there, and we need to set this so our timed events is going to equal, and we're going to have to put JSON decode. And what do we want to decode? We want to decode our data. So where do we get our data from? Well, we could do it here, but I'm going to do it on a second line just to be clear. So string data equals prefs get string events. Now we've got a few errors here, and the error is that this could return a null or something else. We know it doesn't because we've already done the check to make sure it's there. So by putting an exclamation mark there, it says we know that's not null, we know there's something there, return it to us. So here we're going to decode the data. Okay. Then once we've got that data, we need to convert all these strings back into JSON, from JSON back into the objects. So let's come back to our timed events, and we're going to have to create another function which is going to be a factory called timed events from JSON, and we will take into this the JSON data, and we're going to return a new timed event, and the title, let's just put this on multiple lines to make it clear. The title is going to be the JSON data title, and the time is going to be the JSON data time. So this is the key that we're looking for, and we know that it's the string. We know in our JSON file, JSON data, that we've set the key to title there and time there, and that's going to do the opposite basically of this function. And a factory basically is saying we're going to return a timed event from and pass that information in. So back to here, we've decoded the data, and now we have a list of JSON strings. And so just because we got a list, and like we did before, we're going to pass that through a map, and this time we need to be a little bit more specific about what the map's going to return. It's going to return a timed event, and for each item, so we can put item, we're going to return a timed event from JSON and pass in the item. And then, as we did before, we need to convert that back to a list. Okay, list timed events can't be used as a setter because it's final. That's because we set it as final up there. It's no longer a final, it does change. So we'll just take out the word final, and that's our code. Now let's save and refresh, but unfortunately nothing's going to happen. We don't get any error messages, but when this service, timer service, starts, we are now setting this to a blank. Let's put this up there rather than down there, and that'll make this clearer. We're setting this to a blank list, and that is what is being shown, the blank list. We're not yet calling the load function. So to do that, we just create a constructor for the timer service, and all we do is call the load. Great, save that, refresh that, and it's still not going to work because the information that's coming into the timed event here is being read, and we don't want it to be read, we want it to be watched, because we want to watch for changes. So we can change read to watch, but that doesn't work either, not just off the bat, because we need to have a specific type of provider. Okay, that's appeared because the app has sort of refreshed the visuals but not reloaded. If I reload the app again, it'll all disappear, but that proves that it is being loaded in. What we need to do in our service is, once the timed events has been saved, we need to notify listeners. Now we can't do that because that doesn't exist yet. And we can make it exist by changing this here to also contain the information to notify. It's going to become a change notifier. So we can now notify listeners. And so now we've created a service that has this change notifier, which again is part of it's part of Dart Flutter. And we're going to notify our listeners. But we also need to do one other change, and that is in the main, instead of just being a provider, it's going to be a change notifier provider. And that means all the widgets that are listening to this are also going to be listening for changes and understand what to do when a change happens. So let's refresh now, and bingo, all our items appear because we have made a change. The app has started. It starts with a empty list. It loads our data in and then notifies anything listening to it to say there's been a change here, do the change, note of change, update yourself, rebuild. And that's what our event list does, rebuilds itself. Okay, so now we're getting somewhere. Now the one thing I want to do before the end of this episode is come back to our event list, and we don't want this timer service to save here. We want to add a new one, because that's what that button is really going to be doing, and that doesn't exist yet. So back to our timer service, and we're going to create a new function, void add new, and here we're going to create our new event. Okay, so it's going to be of type timed event. We'll call it new event, and it's going to equal timed event, and we'll give it a title, call it what we want. We'll call it new event, because within our app the pencil icon is going to allow us to edit that later. And when we start, it's always going to be 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. It's never going to start in the future. And now we want to add that event to our list of timed events. We can do that simply by putting timed events add. And what do we want to add? New event. Great. Now, if you were listening before, you'll know nothing's going to happen because we've made a change and we've not told it. So we need to add in our notify listeners to say a change has been made, do something about it. And that's going to do that. Okay, let's save that. Come over to our emulator and hit the add button. And nothing happens. Let's just do a refresh. There we go. It was just a refresh needed. So when we click on add, our new events are added. Excellent. What happens when we refresh again? They all disappear. Why? Well, we're not saving it anywhere now. So what we want to do is when we add a new one, we also want to save that data. So we call our save function. Now, when we refresh and we add a new event and we refresh our app, it stays. Okay, this is looking good now, we're getting somewhere. The final thing I want to do is I want the new event to be at the top. I want it to be in order of the oldest events at the bottom. That seems to make more sense. And there's a few ways, again, we can do that. One of the ways, and the way I'm going to do it, is I'm going to change this here to a private variable. I don't want this accessed from outside of this class. And the way we do that, I'm just going to use the refactor rename, which is F2 on the keyboard in VS Code, is just put an underscore next to it. Now that will go through and it will refactor the code and change it everywhere it needs to be changed. And we'll probably come up with a warning message. Yeah, there we go. Rename field will be invisible in event lists.dart. Rename anyway, we know that. Okay, now when we come to events list.dart, we are trying to get it, but we can't because it's private. So we need to do something. We need to make it available so it can be got from here. And the way we do that is with a getter. So let's copy that. The way we have a getter is by putting get timed events, and this is a function, and what it's going to return is our timed events. So within the class we can access timed events, and although this is the same name without the underscore, I could have put anything there. We could call that whatever we want pretty much, but it makes sense. But it does mean that we can't change anything from the outside. What does that mean? Well, over here before we could have actually made a change. Let's take that out now. We should be able to access that. The getter isn't defined for time of service. Yes, it is. It just needs to be rebuilt. Oh no, it isn't. You were right. Timed events. Let's save it. And save and rebuild, refresh. Okay, so everything's back. But it means they can't be changed from the outside. So we can't say here, for example, timer service dot timed events equals a blank array. We could have done that before, but now we can't because there isn't a setter. So we've got a getter, but we haven't got a setter, and we don't need a setter. But it does mean we can also do other things here. So one of the other things we can do is call reversed, and reversed returns an iterable. And as we know, we can convert that back to a list. And now when we save that, you can see that the emulator, the new event, is at the top. And if we add another new event, it'll also be at the top. And if we stop the app completely and restart it, those will appear. Let's do that quickly. And there we go. Okay, so we've got no way of getting rid of the events, and they don't actually do anything yet, and we will deal with that in the next episode. So folks, if you've enjoyed, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. It does help me out, and hit the notification button to be sure to be notified of the next episode, and we'll see you then. Take care folks. Bye now.